What's up, everyone, and welcome to another review. Instead of doing a review on a brand new game, I figured I would revisit what I would deem to be the classic trilogy that is Dark Souls. That's right, I am reviewing all three at the same time. Since this game has been out for years, this isn't going to be my traditional review. In fact, I have multiple reasons for doing this review, and some controversial in the world of Soulsborne Eki Ring and others not so much. I will stay true to how I do the usual categories, and my rating system will be what I would have recommended for purchase back when these titles came out and what I would recommend for purchase today. Now, I said this in my short Elden Ring review that I have a bias when it comes to From Software titles like these, and I will do my absolute best to be objective in my review despite this fact. With that being said, I want to make my objectives for this review very clear. They are to attract new players into considering these titles for themselves, to compare and contrast Dark Souls 1, 2, and 3, to open up a real dialogue about Dark Souls 2, and talk about the never-ending fight every time a From Software title comes out, which is, do these games really need an easy mode? Now, I started off on 3, so I will be reviewing from the Dark Souls Remaster version and Dark Souls Scholar of the First Sin. Now, before any of you start shaking your heads or cussing at the screen, I am very well aware that there is a difference between Dark Souls 2 and Scholar of the First Sin, and I can promise you all that this difference will not have any effect on my judgment when it comes to reviewing the second installment whatsoever. In fact, for anyone who has played the original of the two, I would encourage you to leave a comment below on the differences in your experiences with it. I will break down each game into the normal categories so that I will not be all over the place, starting with, of course, stories, controls and mechanics, enemies and power scaling, graphics and scenery, and what would this review be without talking about the iconic Souls bosses. Here's the catch though. After I review these titles, I will give a slight closing statement which will be an intro to my new series, which I will break down each title separately in an essay form before I give my final verdict on this trilogy, and I will give each game a separate verdict. Before we get started, as usual, if you like the content, please leave a like and sub to the channel. And now, Chosen Ones, Hollows, and Ashen Ones alike, I bring you the Dark Souls Trilogy review. In Dark Souls 1, the story begins from the beginning of time when only dragons existed. Then fire came and all of the sorrows with it. 4 humanoids find the souls of lords and become Nito, the first dead, the Witch of Izalith, Gwen of the Sunlight, and the furtive pygmy, which we will cover later on. They wage war on the dragons, even recruiting a dragon that would tell them his own kind's weakness so that they would be defeated. With the dragons gone, the Age of Fire could thrive, but the Age of Darkness followed. And now you, the Chosen One, are tasked with either preserving the Age of Fire or bringing about the Age of Darkness. That was just a very small summary of what's to come for new players that are interested in this game. This story really sets the tone for the trilogy to come, and even though they show you the surface level of the lore, there is still so much more to uncover. Every character you encounter has a story and even plays a part in yours as you progress through the main story. Some negative and some positive depending on the decisions you make. For instance, this guy, Solaire of Astora, introduces summoning signs and can be summoned throughout certain parts of the story, and eventually you will have a different encounter later on. Or this douchebag here, Knight Lautrec of Karim, who you free from a cell, can become a problem later on. You can choose to kill him or wait until he does his dirty deed and fight him in a PvE fight later on. I would highly recommend that if this is your first playthrough, that you talk to as many characters as you can. It will help you in future runs to understand the various paths you can take and even unlocking certain items and spells. I've played through this game several times and I can tell you this story never gets old, and this story is so powerful it can even be felt throughout the entire trilogy. Certain things mentioned in this game become somewhat of Easter eggs for the other two games. Even the ending that is canon can be felt. And that in itself truly makes this a truly great start to an amazing journey. Dark Souls 2 starts you off in the land of Drangleic, never knowing why and only knowing that you are the cursed. After falling into a whirlpool filled with souls, you wake up in a place known as Things Betwixt, where you meet 3 old women that used to be firekeepers and one who attends to them. There you are given your first human effigy and an identity. I can say that while most of this story is really in your face, as far as the main quest goes anyway, the rest of the lore is really all over the place. Of course, there is lore for the bosses. For instance, the covetous demon tried to impress Mitha, the baneful queen, by eating a crap ton, but Mitha wanted to be with the king. So much so she used poison to retain her beauty. Other than that, the NPCs of this game really don't seem to hold up the story like the ones in the first Dark Souls do. Instead, some of the characters serve to be as a catalyst to the game's progression. For example, Kale, the traveling cartographer, gives you a key to a mansion in Majula, which will provide you with an Estus shard and even show you a map of Drangleic. After that initial meeting, I didn't see him again. The only person I saw repeatedly throughout the story was this guy who seems to be quite adamant about holding on to his sword. Each NPC seemed to just exist, each with their own purpose of coming to Drangleic, but never really to serve anything major. Regardless, I will say that this seems to be the theme of this game. Cursed, never to know what it is that you want, never knowing your purpose, and forced to either sit on or walk away from the throne of want, which is this land's equivalent to linking the first flame. And the only one truly by your side is the Emerald Herald to guide you and level you up. The one who guides you to King Vendrick, the builder of the kingdom of Drangleic, who sought out another way to keep his land from the curse of hollows. Regardless of how this story is, it does do its own thing, and I have to say that on my first playthrough, it didn't really interest me. However, seeing the vast lands that was created and even adding some lore from the first Souls, I could see that it was also still trying to stay true to the franchise. King Vendrick and his brother Aldia tried to go their own path and ended up hollowed and disfigured in the paths that they took. And that really inspires how all of the residents of Drangleic work. They didn't want to be bound to the same rules as those in Lordran were, even if they were still hooked in by the land's descendants. And if you open your mind to the possibilities that this game's story has to offer, it can really feel like a brand new experience. Dark Souls 3 takes you to the land of Lothric, where once again the fire is beginning to fade. The old Lords of Cinders are called from their grave by the tolling of the bell so that they can take their thrones again and link the fire once more. However, they abandon their duties, forcing the Unkindled to rise and bring them back to their thrones. Aldrich, the Saint of the Deep, the Abyss Watchers, and Yorm the Giant were all the previous lords that were called when the new lord refused to take the throne. Once again, we're back to the formula of Dark Souls 1, with more elements involved. In this one, you'll see a couple of characters return and even learn about the whereabouts of other characters that you encountered in Lordran. They really made NPCs feel like a part of this game in this title. For instance, Sigurd of Katarina, who is different from Sigmire of Katarina, now has a much bigger plot in the story than Sigmire did. If you finish his quest line, he'll show up in the arena with you to battle Yorm the Giant as a promise that he made as a friend. Playing this story, you'll really feel the consequences of not speaking to characters and completing certain quest lines. Like the first one, you won't be able to join certain covenants like the Way of Light. You won't be able to get to certain items and spells. However, there is a slight difference. In the first story, if you didn't speak to Dusk and follow the tasks that you were supposed to, you were not getting to the DLC. In this one, it's more circumstantial consequences, like not talking to certain characters can get others killed. They have way more interactions with each other, no doubt inspired by the actions of the great Unbreakable patches. Throughout the story, there are questions that went unanswered in the first title being unraveled before your eyes. Like, remember the furtive pygmy? You find out exactly where they've been in the DLC of this game. Which brings me to my point that everything in this game feels sad. From the moment you load the game, you can tell that this is the end in every way, shape, and form. The story that ends the cycle. The story that undoes everything the gods did. The weight of the world rests on your shoulders one last time. Each of these stories seems to have a deeper theme to them. In Dark Souls 1, you are the chosen one, charged with linking the fire and continuing the cycle of the Age of Fire. Your pathway is paved in following the path of Gwyn and becoming the next Lord of Cinder. In Dark Souls 2, you are Cursed One, destined to make a difficult decision to sit on the throne of want, to end the curse, or walk away from it. From the moment you enter things betwixt, you are destined for greatness, you just never actually know it. Having to decide what you want, deciding the fate of the entire land. In Dark Souls 3, you are reduced to ash, metaphorically speaking, of course. As an unkindled, your only purpose is to bring the Lords of Cinder to their thrones in order to continue the Age of Fire or begin the Age of Darkness. You aren't even worthy of being a Lord of Cinder, you're just a last resort. And because of these running themes, I really think it helps put the trilogy together lore-wise. Even the black sheep of the family, Dark Souls 2, while it walks its own path, still connects 1 and 3 by being the catapult to set the stage for the greatness that is Dark Souls 3. Without 2, you can't have 3. It wouldn't have been possible to create that kind of setting, unless of course 3 became 2 and a different 3 was made, but that's not the point. The point is, regardless of how you feel about any of these 3 stories, they played a part in creating a great lore and an excellent experience. Dark Souls 1 controls tend to be a bit sluggish. While you won't have to worry too much about whether or not your commands match the frame rates, you will have to worry about timing your frames correctly. I say this because some of the enemies and bosses in the game move a few seconds faster than you. While the game feels ultra slow compared to the other 2 titles, it is still pretty well designed as far as your controls go. There are some inconveniences when it comes to jumping. I don't know about how it was for you, but sometimes when I would press B to run, I would end up jumping. Or when I would attack certain enemies, I would give them a push before making the actual attack. Now this goes for all the titles, but in different ways. When you command an attack, you are stuck in that command until you get hit or the frames run out for it. It's normally pretty forgiving for the fact that if you're locked on to an enemy, the attack will follow wherever they are. It can be frustrating, but I don't think it's anything major, and truth be told, if you spam your attacks out of desperation, that is more than likely to happen than not. Now, as far as the menus go, I think they're fairly decent when it comes to item and weapon selection. There wasn't a time where I felt like I couldn't find an item, weapon, or spell of my choice. They were pretty well organized, seeing as most of your stuff is kept in a certain order. I don't have a lot to say in this title. For how this game was developed, you may find it easy to navigate everything, but annoying based on the fact that you have to be so careful with timing. So you start Dark Souls 2 after playing the first installment, and already it starts to feel faster. The controls are smooth, really smooth. So smooth that when you make attacks in this game, it's like your character is thinking for themselves. This isn't necessarily a good thing. When I say that it's like they're thinking for themselves, I mean if you spam attacks in this title, not only can you not get out of the command until the frames run out, but you'll be swinging in the same direction that you started swinging in, even if you're locked onto the enemy. I can't tell you how many times I died because I was attacking an enemy and they dodged and I was still swinging my weapon in their last location. Oh, something that I didn't mention in the last game that was only a minor nitpick for the first Souls game is that you can climb ladders fast, but you can't slide down them. Why is this an issue? Because I've been knocked off of ladders too many times due to enemies who shoot arrows. That's a breath of fresh air here because now you can slide down the ladders. The only trade-off here is that when you climb fast here, you use up stamina. Other than that, the mapping of the buttons is still the same, minus the fact that to jump, you have to hold down B to run and click the left thumbstick at the same time. The menu in this game is actually a lot better. I found it was much easier to find everything that I wanted to equip. Everything is broken down into easier categories. Makes it much more convenient when you need to switch weapons and spells on the fly, and it makes it much easier to use certain items too, especially if you haven't equipped those said items to your belt. For the challenges of this game, you need all the conveniences that you can get, and while the convenience is great, it might be a hassle when it comes to your directional attacks. And then there was 3. After 2 games, they managed to get some of the complaints I had from the other 2 right. The timing, motions, the works. If you didn't think things could get any smoother, then pop in Dark Souls 3 and be amazed. The mapping of the buttons stayed the same as in 2, but they feel more fluid. Any directional attacks that I made locked onto enemies that I missed was completely my fault. Truth be told, these Souls titles are all about timing your attacks and dodges, but in this one they felt way more in sync. Hey, want to climb up or slide down the ladder fast? Do so as much as you like. You won't lose any stamina this time. Want to spam the crap out of attacks? Be my guest. This game is the most forgiving when it comes to getting out of certain attack commands. Complaint time. I had the same problems that I had in the first Souls title when I would try to attack enemies and push them back. Dark Souls 3 just shows you what it looks like when it's faster. As for navigating the menus, they kept the same formula as in 2 and added the fact that you could see your stats. I found this to be inconvenient in the fact that, yeah, I could switch my weapons in the menu, but I couldn't see anything else around me, and for some reason, I don't know if it's just me having poor vision or what, but the items in 2's menu seemed a lot bigger to me. Either way, the inconveniences aren't the same, and you'll find that they are relatively easy to get around. As you can tell, between Souls games, your buttons never really change, and menu navigation fluctuates from kinda okay to good to just okay. I didn't mention this earlier because this seems to be a problem that I have in every Souls title, and it's that damn camera. That's the real boss in the game. I hate when I'm fighting an enemy and the camera goes into the wall so that I can't see what they're doing, especially if you fight your battles locked onto enemies. Yet and still, if you can get the timing down, and you will need to train your mind on the timing between the 3 titles, the games can be quite simple to navigate. I am going to say that my favorite menu of the 3 is Dark Souls 2. For all of the obstacles that I will get into later, that one convenience helped me out of so many pickles. My favorite controls for this trilogy, however, was Dark Souls 3. Something about being able to move and slice through hollows just does it for me. You can't have a Souls title without its flaws though. It's just up to you and what flaws you are willing to deal with. Dark Souls enemies and power scaling never really changes throughout the trilogy. Well, the enemies do, so I'm going to start this section off a little differently. First, I want to explain how the power scaling works in the trilogy as a whole. Then I will break down the differences in each title's enemy encounters, classes, weapons, because I'm not really a spellcaster, and hitboxes. This is also the perfect chance to discuss whether or not these games actually needs an easy mode or not, and what I think of the developers' stances when it comes to such demands. The power scaling in each game works on an area basis, meaning that the further you progress in each game, the stronger enemies get. Now this also depends on how you level yourself up before you go into each area. You have the choice to level yourself up using any of the following categories, which have effects on different attributes on your character, like your health and stamina, for just a quick example. Physical, lightning, bleed, magic, poison, frost, and fire resistances are all raised as a result of what you choose to level up as well. It is very important to pay attention to these things as you level up, because there are certain areas as well as enemies who do stat effect damages on you that builds up over a very small period of time. And while there are items that help cure you of these effects, for example the purple moss clump cures poison, it never hurts to have a little extra defense. I say a little because while I notice the defense enemy wise, this is really flawed when it comes to areas with poison. The categories that you can choose between to level up are vitality, attunement, endurance, strength, dexterity, resistance, intelligence, and faith. Those are just the base attributes, but Dark Souls 2 adds on adaptability, which actually gives you a bonus boost of resistances against anything that affects your poise, agility, and any poison effects that rack up. You'll want to pay attention to your equipment load as well when you level up so that you can carry certain weapons and wear certain armors. Your stats menu will change between games as well. I was just giving an example of the base stats and effects that you will see between each game. Now when it comes to weapons, armor, shields, and spells, you will need to not only pay attention to your equipment load, but what attributes you've leveled up in order to be able to wield, wear, carry, and cast each of these categories. For instance, for most spells you will need to level up your faith and intelligence to be able to cast them. There are certain weapons where you will need to level up your strength and dexterity, and sometimes faith and intelligence in order to be able to wield that weapon effectively. Something I didn't mention that really helps with your stats, which I will break down a little bit more in depth when I start talking about each game separately, are rings. Rings can be very effective in helping you to raise certain stats, resistances, and even boost what you collect. You have a lot of tools in the whole trilogy at your disposal. It just depends on the choices you make, what build you want to run with, your style of playing the game, all of it. And trust me when I say that in the Souls community, there are a lot of styles people play with. And with character customization in play, each game has a specific cheesy class and certain items that you can start off with if you're a first-time player. Now let's break down each title. In Dark Souls 1, you'll notice that you'll be able to customize your character before the start of the story. You can change your physique, class, and your face to whatever you choose. Pick a gift to start off with and decide your name, and you're right in. For first-time players that want to progress a little faster than normal, I would suggest picking the Master Key because at a certain point in the game, you can skip one of the hardest areas, which is Blight Town, and get straight to the objective. Now, when I first played this game, I used to think that the Knight class was the way to cheese through this game, but as of this playthrough, I decided to go with the Bandit, and holy crap, I breezed through this game like it was nothing. For first-time players, take that with a grain of salt because I've played every title multiple times and I've been playing this series for a while now, so I have a feel for how each one works. So for first-time players, I would suggest trying the Warrior class just because it's the most balanced class and it will be easier for you to figure out your playstyle. Also in this title, whatever class you pick will decide what weapon you get when you get out of your cell. When you step into the field and start fighting enemies, you'll notice that your hitboxes are fairly decent. You won't have any trouble hitting enemies unless they dodge. Some enemies will back up just to try and take a hit of the Estus flask to heal themselves before continuing. Which reminds me of another thing I didn't mention. You have your light attacks, heavy attacks, parries, and if you walk up behind the enemies just right, backstabs. Guess what though? Some of these enemies can do the same things that you can do. Paying attention to the enemy is really important because depending on what their stances are, is depending on what they're going to do next. Remember when I said timing is key? Well, it's time to explain that. In this game, if you get caught in certain enemy attacks, it can be extremely unforgiving. Take these guys for instance. They are the weakest enemy in the game, but when they start wildly swinging their swords, they can be the most frustrating enemies if you get caught in their attacks. And they're worse once this guy gives them a stat boost. That's right, some enemies can even help other enemies at times. And when they gang up on you, it can feel almost impossible to get away depending on what you're using against them. Back to the hitboxes though. While the enemy hitboxes are decent in this game, there is a slight payoff when it comes to yours. Now this is one thing that happens in all of them and it's pretty fair, which is impact damage. For instance, certain bosses like the Taurus Demon for instance, even if you dodge the initial attack, you'll still take damage from the shockwave of its weapon due to how heavy the demon and the weapon is. That's cool with me. The problem I have with the character hitbox is that if you try to dodge certain attacks when the enemy is in the middle of an attack, their attack actually follows you. So what the hell? Does my hitbox have a freaking magnet on it or something? That's not just the enemies either, that's certain bosses too. It can honestly get really annoying when you have multiple enemies that jump at you and you realize that each one of their attacks is going to lock onto you in midair. So not only can you lock onto the enemies, but apparently they can do the same. It's only a minor inconvenience though, and it won't slow down any of the progress. Speaking of locking onto enemies, those of us that have played this game for a long time can roam the game without locking on because in truth, once you've played this game enough, you'll notice that it's easier. I lock on to enemies still, and I only lock on to bosses half the time. For first time players, I recommend that you lock on first to get a feel for enemies and bosses alike, so that when you fight without locking on through your next playthroughs, it'll seem a little easier to control the pace of the fight and even beat the camera. That's the payoff for locking on, is that your camera will become your worst enemy. However, locking on is like the training wheels for these games, and they can make it more convenient for you to focus on the enemy rather than having to focus on the camera alongside of that. Dark Souls 2 has the same concept of character customization, except for you have to run to the former Firekeepers in order to start. Once again, you can change your face, physique, and class, pick the gift you want to start with, and head off into your journey. In this title, I've never really been bold enough to stray into the path of a different class. As you can see in the footage, I was really debating on whether or not I should leave my comfort zone. Nope, I stayed with the Knight class and strength build, and I'll explain that later. You start off and you can either choose to fight the enemies in the tutorial areas, or you can wait until the Forest of Giants, or both. When you get to the Forest of Giants, you are met with what seems like a crap ton of enemies. Enemy hitboxes I didn't really have a problem with, it's more so the boss hitboxes I had the issues with. I'll explain that in a little bit. Where the enemies didn't seem to track me in midair like they did in the first one, they were very relentless in this title. Meaning if you're going to try and run past them, you're going to have a lot of them on your tail before you know it. Let me just say that I don't have the footage in this playthrough of me getting chased by every enemy, because this time I fought off most of them, if not all of the enemies in front of me. And that's the issue with the enemies in this game. In certain areas, it just feels like there's poor enemy placement, making it a very monotonous task to progress. And that's where I'm going to stop for a second. There's a payoff for every one of these titles, but this one, while it seems to be counterproductive placing enemies so close together, they make up for it by perma-killing enemies if you die in the same area for a certain period of time. I want you all to keep this in mind for when I make my case, because that's going to be a really important factor. And I don't know how it was in the original Dark Souls 2, but in Scholar of the First Sin, they seem to show like a patronizing type of mercy. Like, "Aw, you couldn't get good? Well, here, we'll just kill the enemies for you so that you can progress. Is that better? No, it's not. I'm a challenge seeker. That's why on this playthrough, I made sure that I killed as many enemies as I possibly could so that I could get good. This is a double-edged sword for first-time players, because while this can be a convenience, it can be an inconvenience having to die so many times to get that to happen. Now let's talk hitboxes when it comes to boss fights. Besides the fact that sometimes your character has a mind of their own, bosses are actually pretty easy to hit. It's certain bosses that can swing their weapons when you're not even close, or when their attack is already seemingly finished and you still take damage. For instance, the Sinner has a thrust that after their attack looks finished, you take damage by running towards her to make your attack. Or the Fume Knight, who seems to be able to hit you while you're behind him and he's making an attack in the opposite direction. Vets can easily overcome this challenge, but first-time players may find this difficult on the first playthrough. This is a lot of the reason why I didn't stray from my comfort zone when it came to doing this run. My build helps me to overcome 2's many flawed challenges. Still though, I think these obstacles make the game satisfying when it comes to progression. It's that ability to say, you threw this crap at me and I still pushed through, that brings out the beauty of Dark Souls 2. In Dark Souls 3, you can start customizing your character after the story's been revealed. I'm not going to repeat what's already been said in the last 2 games. In the last game, in this one, I normally choose the life ring as a burial gift to start. I figure since I normally do strength builds, it's a good start. In this one, Knight class is cheese and you can get through the story easy with it. Again, for first-time players, choose whatever you wish, since it will be the perfect chance for you to explore how you're going to play this game for yourself and what you want to carry. Starting off, I already don't notice any hitbox issues, and as far as I could tell, there were no hollows or bosses that locked on to my hitbox in midair or attack. If anything, I was able to stop the hollows attacks simply by rolling into them. Yep. In this one, your enemies have a noticeable stagger system. This game is very forgiving for any spamming or dodging for that matter, and maybe it's too forgiving. Where in 2, I felt as though there was a sense of I overcame your flaws. In this one, after your first playthrough, it doesn't feel challenging enough in the same sense. In this one, it feels like they relied heavily on the challenges of the bosses more so than your enemies. Well, except for enemies like the jailers, who on initial contact start to temp drain your health, and if you fight enough of them, then you're screwed. Or how about the Irithyll and Silver Knights? These guys can become a serious hassle if you don't take care of them. However, there are only certain enemies that are relentless in chasing you, like the rats and skeletons. Keep in mind though, this game is the fastest of the three, so when it comes to boss fights, you're going to want to really buckle down and focus on their patterns. Bosses like Osiris, for instance, really require that kind of attention because he can be lost track of easily even if you're locked onto him. There's not too much to cover when it comes to this game, it's more or less the same premise. I know I didn't cover PvP or scripted PvE battles because at the time of this recording, I didn't encounter too many online players. Dark Souls 2 though definitely has the most scripted invasion encounters because some of them keep coming back even after you defeat them. The plus to this is that you will at least get enough human effigy you need to keep in stock and plenty of badass weapons to boot. In 3, I had the most PvP battles, and that's only when I got to a certain area. Normally though, in those battles, you keep your leveling stats when you invade someone, and let me tell you, I've met some pretty powerful characters. That's only one of the only times I've struggled with frame rates in 3 because for some reason when it seems like I dodge the other player, for them, I'm taking the damage. My attacks on other players don't always register either. Maybe I just need to check my damn internet. I didn't fully cover the ring slots that you get in each one either. The first Dark Souls gives you 2 slots and 2 and 3 gives you 4. And I'm using this to segue into the easy mode conversation. Rings really do help whatever build you're trying to use. Having 4 slots in 2 makes a lot of sense, and in 3 if you use the right rings it can damn near make the game super easy. And when I rate the challenge of all 3 games, 2 is always at the top with 3 being the easiest. Regardless of the challenge though, the entire trilogy really does give you more than a helping hand to complete the challenges that all 3 have to offer. So when it boils down to it, when I hear people complain about From Software titles needing an easy mode, I say it's already there. It just requires the player to think about what would make these titles easier for them. Now that's not to say that I'm not sympathetic to anyone with that thought process. I mean, that's a part of the reason why I've broken this down the way that I have in this section. To help new players out in a way so that you can enjoy the game, but also think about the other side for a second. And I'm not talking about the get-gooders, I'm talking about those that gravitated towards this game because they were bored of the same formula that they normally get from video games. They found joy in the fact that these titles were challenging and that they overcame those challenges. For some players, it gives them a sense of meaning and purpose for conquering certain bosses, enemies, and areas. So when I hear the devs of From Software say, no, we're not going to add an easy mode just because certain players found our game too hard, I tend to side with them. And I personally don't have a problem with the easy mode if that's how the game was developed, but that's not how these were developed. So if the game was ever too hard, it was a simple matter of me putting it down and coming back to it later. I want as many people as possible to enjoy these titles, and quite honestly, if inclusion is the only real complaint, then these games are very inclusive to those interested in it. If time is the issue, let me say that even just an hour a day can help you to master these games. All I'm saying is that for as much effort that they put into developing all 3 of these games and as many tools as they give to us to help us get through them, there's no reason not to just sit back and enjoy the process.
Excuse me, I must have dozed off. It's rather warm in here. Well, hasn't it been all too long? It's good to see you.
For those of you who made it this far in the video, I really appreciate you. To get more reviews, rankings, and episodes of the Alicast, please hit that sub and the bell to let you know when I drop new videos. Also hit that like button if you enjoy the content. Also, you can catch my streams on Twitch and soon here. The link for my Twitch channel will be in the description below. Now back to Dark Souls. I played the remastered version of Dark Souls 1, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on graphics of this game. Instead, I'm going to spend a lot more time on the scenery. Graphics wise, you get what you get when it comes to a remaster. Just enhancements. Frame rates are made stiff in this game when it comes to movements of enemies, your characters, and NPCs. Though the stiffness comes from how slow the game is, how slow you move, and how fast the enemies move. Textures of the scenery, while not the greatest, are still good in the fact that I know the grass is grass, marble is marble, and so on and so forth. The scenery is absolutely breathtaking when it comes to designs. Orlando, for instance, is probably one of the most beautiful areas created in the game. That's not to take away from any of the other areas, because every area is amazing in their own way and for their own reasons. For instance, Ulasal Township is amazing because of the amount of destruction brought about by the Abyss, and the scene really captures that the further into the area you go. Or the Lost Izalith, which really captures the result of the witch trying to recreate the first fire. Every area in this game makes sense not only to the story, but how you travel around as well. For instance, to get to the Valley of Drakes, I can get there from either Darkroot Basin or Blighttown. To get to Blighttown, I can get there from the Depths, which I can reach after unlocking a certain part of the Undead Burg. This game is linear in the sense that when it comes to the story, but the pathways are only linear in certain areas. There's a nice balance between being linear and non-linear in this one, but my real point is that everything is mapped in certain ways that make sense. And with each scene being amazing, it really helps bring out the feeling and elements that the story has to offer in this game. You'll see a kingdom that fell from grace due to the linking of the first fire, those who tried to create a different alternative, and one who just basks in the essence of death and darkness. Dark Souls 2, while I did say the movements were too smooth, I didn't just mean that for how you move, but for how the enemies moved, how certain textures felt in the game, everything. I mean, here we have another kingdom that fell due to the same cycle, and yet I didn't quite get the same feeling in each scene. Instead, I got a different feeling. I got the feelings of the developer creative process when creating each area. I'll get into that momentarily, but first, I want to kind of touch on what I mean when it comes to not getting the same feelings as I did in the first one. Take Drangleic Castle, for instance. While it looks nice, I don't get the feeling of a king that wanted to save his kingdom from the Curse of Hollows. I got more of the feeling that, hey, this castle is really nice and, well, it's somewhat imaginative. This might ruffle some feathers because amongst those who are fans of Dark Souls 2 truly believe that this game is least linear. And they're right, this game is the least linear. What does that have to do with what I said about Drangleic Castle? Well, I said it before, for everything in these titles that we praise, there is a payoff for it. While this game isn't as linear as 1 or 3, the payoff for making so many areas in the game is that some of your areas have to be smaller. In the case of Drangleic Castle, I didn't feel the majesty of a large and powerful kingdom, but rather a small bump in the road that I have to come back to later on in the game. That's not just here either, there are a few other areas like that as well. For instance, Iron Keep I feel could have had a lot more to offer. Now in every Souls title, there are some areas larger than others, and while I see what the devs were trying to accomplish here, it's the same accomplishment that they were reaching for that kind of seemed to work against them. Now that doesn't take away from the scenery, because man does From Software have an amazing imagination. Take Hyde's Tower of Flame. The sunsets, the buildings that you can imagine once stood in such beauty. Hell, even the enemies make the place look amazing. I don't mean fighting the enemies either, I mean just the enemy appearance. And that's just what I mean when I say I wish they could have elaborated more on certain areas. While this area is gorgeous, you don't really spend a lot of time here, especially since this is a pathway to a much more dreary scene in the game. Helium Lois, one of the DLC packs, is my favorite area in the entire game, mostly because I love snow areas, but they put a lot of emphasis on everything in this area: enemies, scenery, and story. The DLC areas feels kind of like their own separate game, and I get more feeling out of these areas than any place else. I haven't even talked about the mapping in this game, which is in most cases confusing as hell, at least to me anyway. Take getting to Huntsman's Copse. Getting there makes sense, but where I ended up left me a little puzzled. Not because of the mapping, but mostly because, and this may not be as important to a lot of fans, but the sky. It's always that damn sky that throws me off. One minute we're in the midst of a setting sun, to going to a scene based in the nighttime, back to a place where the sun shines again. I can never figure out the time of day in this game. What's even more puzzling is after leaving Huntsman's Copse and traveling through Harvest Valley to climb up the tower of the Earthen Peak, somehow leads you to the Iron Keep. One thing I forgot to mention when talking about one's mapping is that you can also see certain areas from different areas in the game that make sense as to how you got there. In cases like Hyde's Tower of Flame, you can actually see it from Majula, but I didn't see a lava-born castle from anywhere near Harvest Valley or Earthen Peak. Now, there are areas that make sense when it comes to travel, like once you beat the Flexitile Century, you can take the boat to get to Lost Bastille. Every area in this game connects in a very different and confusing way, and some areas in the main game feel so compact than others. The goal from the devs was to create a form of open world experience, and they achieved that. But as I said in the beginning, it just tends to work against them in this instance. The graphics in Dark Souls 3 look the most amazing when it comes to the scenery. I would say that the characters, enemies, and bosses look better too, but the scenery is absolutely astonishing. And with that being said, this game is the most linear out of every title, so the way everything connects makes sense would kind of be pointless to talk about. I can give you an example of how they try to take away from the game's more linear approach. Climbing up a certain tower in Faron will lead you to an unreachable spot near the Crucifixion Woods. It's really small stuff like that. However, I love the detail that they put into being able to see the path that you have to take, and that really becomes apparent when you reach Orlando and you look back and say, wow, I really traveled from there? Speaking of which, the way they brought the scenery in this area full circle is genius. I mean, you get to see what sits underneath Orlando, and honestly, I wish they would have been able to do that in the first one because it really piques my curiosity on what it would have looked like back then. Then you get up to Orlando and say, why Gwendolyn? I love what you've done with the place. Yeah, over the years, he's let a few buildings go, blocked off the rooms that you used to get to the main hall in the first place since no one's staying here but him anyway, and he even fixed the broken window from the first one. That's part of what I mean when I say that this game feels like the end. It gives off that nostalgic feeling. I mean, Orlando isn't what it used to be. Generations have passed, so there are bosses and characters that take after those from the first title, and even the old Demon King is surrounded by piles of demons that pass away over the years. The DLC only helps to elevate this feeling by what's happening in Ariandel, and when you reach the Ring City, it looks like the city lost whatever glory it was meant to have in the past. And so now we're back to the scenery giving you the same feelings as the first one. It's just amplified by a cycle that's gone on too long and needs to be put to an end. The textures of this title are the best out of all three as well. It's almost as if FromSoft was thinking that since this game was going to be their last Dark Souls title, that they might as well put their all into the aesthetics of this game. And what more really needs to be said other than the graphics and scenery for this game was an amazing send-off to a well-loved trilogy. While there are flaws graphically in this trilogy, for instance in 1 you basically carry defeated hollows, in 2 they would get stuck in walls, and in all 3 besides cutscenes the mouths of the NPCs never really move, the complaints don't take away from what FromSoft has created. Whether you're a fan of 1, 2, 3 or the whole trilogy, there's something amazing to take away from all of them. For years we've watched FromSoft's creations come to life in different ways, but you can feel the effort that they put into each title. And while 2 really had to grow on me, I love the way they tried to make it its own game. We are finally here at one of the staples that makes Dark Souls games so iconic, and that's bosses. Man, I love how FromSoftware creates their bosses first and foremost. I have to say that out of every game I've played ever, they have some of the most imaginative bosses ever. However, even as great as the bosses are, I don't want to stay on this topic for very long. So let's start with Dark Souls 1. The Asylum Demon starts you off as your tutorial boss to let you know how the game is going to go. In this one, you can choose to fight it with a broken sword or circle the Asylum and drop in with whatever weapon you have to get some drop damage on it. This is one of 2 bosses that you can do drop attacks on. The rest you're on your own. The boss challenge in this game, and well, every Dark Souls title, fluctuates. Not in a traditional sense either, except for a few bosses. I mean, if you have the build that works for you, then you might have an easier time with certain bosses. Others can be rather annoying if you don't have the right build. The Moonlight Butterfly is the perfect example of this annoyance if you have a strength build with a melee weapon. Regardless of certain annoyances though, this game gave birth to some of the most iconic bosses that still get talked about today. It was through this game that they gave birth to one of the most perfect 1v2 boss fights ever, and they haven't been able to match it since. I mean, to all of my vets out there, how many YouTube videos on Dark Souls have you watched that don't feature Smo and Ornstein? This iconic boss duo worked so well together and so well against you. I mean, not only them, but Artorias, his faithful companion Sif, Quelaag, Manus, and so many more. Whether you raged out about a boss or you loved a boss, you're probably still talking about these bosses. Not to mention the themes that you hear playing now is one of the few amazing themes that you hear in these boss fights. Of course, here comes the trade-off for having good bosses. There are a couple of reskins, which if I must say is my only complaint. I don't know what it is, but when you have devs that are capable of creating bosses like these, it always disappoints me a little to see them take the path of add more powers here type reskins. Speaking of reskins, it's the former king of reskins and gank fights, introducing Dark Souls 2 bosses. I say former king because before Elden Ring came out, I didn't think they could get much worse than this. I mean, in this game, they don't give you a tutorial boss, you just stumble upon your first boss fight. After the first couple of bosses, it's time to get jumped by what I would deem as one of the most ridiculous boss fights. This trio of tyranny was one of the first times I actually struggled in this game. I mean, there is a strat to at least making the fight easier. Now, this is for first-time players, and this rarely works for two of them, so after you take out the first one, the rest is up to you. As soon as you enter the arena, you land on a platform with one of them already on with you. Take him out and then wait for the other two. The second one will come up soon after, so smack him for as much damage as quickly as possible because the third will soon follow him. Now, I recently discovered that if you don't move to the edge on the right of the platform, it will not attract them, so try and stay on the platform near the wall. Once you hit the main floor of the arena, how you beat them is just how you beat them. Gank fights in this game are kinda trash. For instance, one pet peeve of mine is when bosses throw out extra enemies in a fight. It tends to be an extra hassle to have to duck and dodge enemies that you fight before you get to the boss, let alone in the arena. Now, on top of that, they also try to reintroduce boss fights from the first game like the Belfry Gargoyles and even brought back the theme from the first one, and it just felt lazy in that aspect. Or the wannabe Ornstein, which was a joke of a fight. Besides some repeat boss fights, they really do have some good bosses too. Say what you want, but the Rotten is a pretty imaginative boss. A boss made up of corpses dropped into that very arena. Which reminds me, this game doesn't just focus on the bosses themselves, but the arenas too. The fire in the Rotten's arena will damage you if you don't pay attention, and not lighting the windmill will cause you to have to fight Mytha in the arena filled with poison. I have to give them credit for that because you rarely think of that in 1 and 3. Some of those work against the boss too, like the two dragon riders. You can choose to knock the one shooting arrows down by leading the other dragon rider to him, or you can let him hop off of his pedestal after attacking the grounded one. I'd say one of the most frustrating bosses is the Old Iron King. I mean, this guy is so easy, but you're fighting his gigantic ass on a pebble of an arena. I will also say for some bosses I thought were cooler, it feels like they robbed them of great themes. Sorry to say, but the Throne Watchers I felt deserved a much better theme. Now, one of the most iconic boss fights and themes was King Vendrick. It was kind of eerie yet sad at the same time, especially once you know his story. While I do wish I could say there were more bosses I enjoyed, I can't say that I didn't enjoy the bosses in this game either. And finally, we have a game that focused all its time and attention on boss fights and themes, Dark Souls 3. That's right, it doesn't get any better than this trilogy than the bosses and themes of this game. Again, this is the end, so let's hire the best orchestras we can, speed up the pace, make more unique bosses than reskins, and let's throw them all together and give players the time of their lives. Hey, and guess what? You get a tutorial boss again. Except you don't get to skip this one, but you can get some extra shots in before he starts attacking. And from this fight, you'll know what shines through the most in this game. There's something I didn't mention about the other two games that will be a real heavy emphasis in this one. In 1, there are a couple of bosses with this feature that is kind of passive, but Smo and Ornstein show this, and that's the second phase. In 2, fights like with the Few Night and Valstat also have a second phase, but you can cheese out of the Fume Knights by healing. Almost every boss in this game has a phase 2 that you can tell is coming not only by what the boss does, but by listening to the boss music as well. There are about 6 exceptions to this. The Nameless King and his Wyvern, Sister Frida, and Slave Knight Gale all have 3 phases. The Abyss Watchers, the Lothric brothers, and the final boss, which I will not be showing here, has 2 full health phases. Why do I say 2 full health phases? Because the rest of the boss phases are divided into half of their health bars, and you better be ready to go the distance with some of these bosses. I already warned you of the fast pace, so first time players are going to want to really watch yourself here. Hey, and guess what? There's only 1 repeat boss in this entire game. Every boss is unique to the fullest. Even if you don't like certain bosses like this a-hole sucker here, I believe you will get a full enjoyment out of progressing through this game. Another thing that I didn't mention is that in every Souls title, you'll want to pay attention to what weaknesses that each boss has as well as their resistances. It will definitely help you to get through fights faster and more efficiently. In this one, you can even parry the crap out of certain bosses to make it go by easier as well. So while it is faster, you have a lot that you can do to help control the pacing of the fights. And well, this game has the perfect boss lineup mixed with some of the most epic boss themes that I've ever heard, and it just leads to a great ending. I was going to say this in the enemies and power scaling segment, but I completely spaced it, so I'm saying it now. You can infuse your weapons to help give you elemental and physical buildups on the enemies, the bosses especially. If you don't want to infuse your weapons, you can use pine resins to give your weapons that temporary boost. You can also upgrade your weapons and armors to give the best offense and defense as you can get. This is really helpful in your quest to defeat bosses as well, but once again there's a catch. In 1, I noticed that certain weapons and armors could be damaged, and in 2, your weapons and armors are in constant need of repair. 3, you don't have to worry about that at all. I'm just giving new players something to be aware of before they step into the boss arenas. Other than that, you are in for quite the journey when it comes to bosses and their lore for first-time players. Well, it's time for the verdict, and let me just say that regardless of any of my opinions on these titles, I am very much open to having the conversation about the elephant in the room that is Dark Souls 2: Scholar of the First Sin. As I promised, I will not let my lack of experience with the original Dark Souls 2 cloud my judgment. So what would have been my recommendation for this trilogy? Well, if I would have reviewed these games back then, 1 and 3 would have gotten the immediate purchase stamp. 2, on the other hand, I would have said skip it, it's not really that great of a game. However, today I am in the firm belief that you should not play just one or the other, but all, even 2. I said it in my Elden Ring review that I thought 2 was a mistake. However, after recently revisiting the game, I can easily say that I was definitely mistaken when it comes to certain aspects of the game. I still feel the same way about the story today as I did back then. While I don't feel like it is as good as 1 or 3's, I do like it in the sense that it kind of strays away from the story that the other 2 tell. And when you look back at the initial launch of the game, the devs did say they were going to make it harder than the first title. Either way, I am glad to say that I was at least half wrong in my judgment of Dark Souls 2: Scholar of the First Sin. And with that being said, that is the end of this review and the beginning of a new series. I will be going back through the Dark Souls trilogy and making separate essays on each title, and even doing a side-by-side comparison of both Dark Souls 2 and Dark Souls 2: Scholar of the First Sin. Also, join me as I revisit and revise my original review of Elden Ring. I don't feel like I put forth the effort that needed to go into the original review, so I will be diving further into the game's elements. Until then, you all be easy, and I'll see you next time.
Well, say hello to the nice giant. He adores visitors.